Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, listeners, and as always, I say anybody new because hopefully there are still some new people out there who want to tune in or have been advised that this is a great show for the weekend. I might be sounding a little bit buoyant. It's a little bit of camouflage because I had one of the worst experiences ever yesterday on a flight back to the UK, which, subject to how it goes with Steve, I may or may not comment. Anyhow, good morning, Stephen. You look lovely, my friend.
Good afternoon from Kuala Lumpur, Chris.
Yeah, really love the fact that you're wearing your wife's T-shirt. Looks lovely on you.
Well, I've just actually arrived back from holiday, so I landed about an hour and 25 minutes ago. So I rushed back here to get on the show with you.
Well, listen, how was your flight?
My flight was sound, absolutely great. Yeah, no issues.
Okay, all right. I'll come to mine.
Good experience. I mean, we were in Langkawi, which is one of the islands just off Malaysia, and we were on ATR, so it's small aircraft. But look, short sector, crew did well. Everybody was masked up. Airports on entry into Langkawi, we were screened. We scanned, so we've got the track, trace, and test. So we scanned on our local Malaysian app. When you enter, they take your temperature and off you go. And from there, everybody's compliant. There was no service on board, but then for a 1 hour sector, it's
yeah. What sort of information did you have to supply?
We didn't supply anything. We all of our details are recorded in the app. So the app provided by the Malaysian government, which they seem to be able to design and launch within a matter of weeks. I mean, this app was up and running the first week in April. It's called My Sejahterah. So all of my personal details are already stored and already evident there. So they know exactly where I am. When you enter the airport, you scan. But if you're entering a shopping centre or a restaurant or whatever, you scan as well. So that's how the testing is, or the tracking is working. And then, of course, if there's an alert, if they trace that we were with something that's positive, then of course you get an alert, and then they ask you to go for a test. So you get tests here whether you're symptomatic or asymptomatic. It's not like in some countries in Europe where you're obviously only tested if you're symptomatic, and then you confirm if that's negative. You carry on your life as normal, but everything's stored there. I'm not worried about Big Brother personally. It doesn't really bother me much about what they do, as long as we're all conforming and doing the right thing. Then I suspect that we get out of this back to the normal world that we all want to get back to. Yeah, so the sooner we comply, the better, I suspect.
Exactly. Steve, listen, you just touched on a point there, and it's one of the questions that came through from Mohammed. Okay, and what he's saying is he's looking at international news, and he keeps seeing how many different ideas there are about whether you should or you shouldn't wear masks. And I replied to him, and then he said the UK, he said, is split. He said, which is right, between Wales, Scotland, England. Why can they not get it right and realise that masks are, of course, a benefit, and especially now that there's these very fine fragments that people are assuming can also come across? Why can't people just say, anywhere in public, anywhere where you can't have social distancing, you must wear a mask? Why not just be definitive about an instruction?
Well, look, I think that's right. I mean, I don't know that there's anything. There was a question before in some parts about this may remove from or impinge on my liberties. But let's be honest. I mean, wearing a mask isn't exactly a hardship. What I would say, Chris, is living in Malaysia as I do, and I've lived in Asia since 2008. We are much more conditioned to masks in this part of the world. Masks are not very common sight in Europe, but if somebody gets sick here in Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Japan, generally they'll still pitch up at the office, but they'll wear a mask for the benefit of not spreading their contagion to others. And we sort of white Europeans might sort of think, oh, why are they wearing a mask? Are they sick? Well, actually, what they're doing is helping you. It's the same in this. It's the same in this environment, Chris. I think with the spread of COVID, I don't know that it is a problem. I did like that the thought that we saw last week. The idea of Alaskan with the yellow card for non-compliant. I thought that was good. What is reassuring to see now is finally the UK government seems to have woken up and smelt the coffee. Maybe it's because the pubs are open. Maybe it's smelling London Pride or a pint of bitter more than the coffee. But Boris was keen to get the pubs open. So maybe that's helped him with his sort of, there's been some inspiration, because I saw yesterday that he's now saying that masks should become commonplace, certainly in England. As the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, however, I would suspect that he should be pushing that agenda across all parts, so four corners of our country, not just in England. But look, I mean, it's not difficult. It's no imposition. And just get on with it. Suck it up for a couple of months, and then we'll all move on to something else better to talk about than COVID-19.
Yeah. Please God. Talking about that, but a guy called Kevin, and I'm not sure whether it must be a relative of yours. He sent me an email and he said, right. Firstly, he said podcast. He said good, like the balance and all this. He said, but what he did say is, where has this Stephen Dickson come from, and why haven't we seen him more often?
well, be careful what you wish for, Kevin.
No, but seriously, he's really impressed with your feedback, your knowledge. So that's, fair play to you. And as I am, or as am I. Now, Steve, another question here as well, which I think is really, really good. Okay, a guy called Tony asked, why on earth now does the press, TV programs, everybody start focusing on all the positives? Because there are a lot of green shoots coming through. Why can they not change the atmosphere and the mentality of people by talking about good things and positive things?
Well, look, this is the age-old adage, Chris, that good stories don't make good news. You look at all. Pre-COVID, let's look at all the things that make front page press. Very few of it is positive messaging. You look at the economy. Well, they look for the small little parts of the economy that aren't functioning properly. They look at the healthcare system. They don't look at the 98% of the NHS that works wonderfully. They look at the 2%, little parts that the Care Quality Commissioner found in an audit report. They look at our industry, and they look at the fact that we handle hundreds and hundreds of thousands of customers every day on airplanes. But they look at the one case where the customer wasn't dealt with properly as a PRM or something else. So, look, I think this is human nature. I don't think there's anything new here. I think selling newspapers or television news is if everything was wonderful, those journalists would be without a job. I guess what's happened recently is they haven't had to work too hard at looking for bad news, because bad news has flooded the global kind of standpoint. But I would say there is a lot of good news out there. So if you just think about last week, and I was watching a program recently which sort of said, look, here's a different view around the economic aspects of or the impact of COVID-19 to the economy. Fundamentally, if you look at the most of UK, Germany, the US, you look at these big markets, three of the top 5 largest economies in the world. Fundamentally, Chris, they were sound. Yeah, they didn't need to have billions and billions of dollars pumped into the economy to rescue us from an economic crisis that was of a making pre-COVID. So actually, what we've got to start doing is start looking for these positives and finding these green shoots, injecting that into the news cycle, because people need to get back out and spend again. People need to get back to the desks and back to the office. But this culture of fear that we continually sort of permeate, around the patch that COVID is such a devastating disease. Well, actually, in relative terms, relative to many other diseases that are out there that have still not disappeared or been eradicated, you look at things like dengue or malaria or polio or whatever. This is nothing by comparison. I mean, as a global, sort of a disease. I'm not saying the impact of it is small. The impact is massive. But I think a lot of that is because that fear culture be permeated. So if we'll find some of those good, those strong green shoots, some long haul flying starting back up again out of Gatwick, I saw British Airways this week. Some international flying starting back up across Europe. People starting to go on holiday again. People wanting to book their holidays. You just come back from Spain. I just come back from Langkawi. Already we're traveling. These are all good news stories. And so I think that what we've got to start doing actually as a society, and not just the news and media organizations, is much more positive thinking. If you're a glass half empty kind of fella, which I'm clearly not. I'm a very, very rare for my glass to get half empty, Chris, as you well know.
As I know, my friend, yeah.
As long as you're keeping me topped up with pegs of Japanese single malt, we're absolutely fine.
Yes.
But sorry, in all seriousness, I do think, while some people have dealt with this differently and are coming out of it in different ways, and we can't question that. Everybody comes out of this in their own way. That there has to be some more positives there. So I'm not sure how to solve for that. We can do lots of things in our podcast, but I think trying to solve the sort of the feeling, the sort of the softer touch stuff is going to be hard, and people will move at different paces. But I think the news organisations have got a lot to answer for here, but more generally.
And Steve, I know it's we're not trying to solve everybody's problems, but what I do see though is the more bad news and the more negativity, it just makes people feel not so good.
Yeah.
And a couple of little quick stories now, right? I've got a brother, one of my brothers, Mickey. He's got his own freight company. And my goodness me, if ever there's somebody who could put this industry to right, it's Mick. And he lets me know so often. Okay. Now, one of the things he had to get a guy who was going to be doing a 40-hour drive. Okay, who went over to collect a few simple pieces. And the way in which he described that he was treated and the attitude, was terrible. Now, I also had a travel experience, British Airways, the crew, absolutely outstanding, fantastic. When I was in Spain, so impressed with the people around where I was staying. Everything, masks, everything was organised, really good. Everybody was getting on well, very, very positive. As soon as I get through back to the UK, Border Patrol. Wrong form was given, so they couldn't do anything. You were sent then to a far corner with tablets. There was one saving grace, a young lady. She was, God knows where she got the patients from, people from all over the place, and she was helping them. She was brilliant. But to put your details in was so complicated, and with so many shortcuts that you can have nowadays, even if you're traveling with your wife, as I was, she had to put her details in separate from mine. Why you don't have, are you traveling with your spouse? Bang, done. It took us hours, Steve. One particular person had an attitude that he should not be allowed to be put in front of people, especially not their first impression coming into the country. Now that I don't understand in both situations. If we're going to try now and get things back up and make people happy and confident, people's attitude and engagement has got to be good. I also got a post where this guy put on there that he was driving into the car park of his office. There was limited spaces. As he was just to pull in, another car shot in front of him. He just got out and said, that's my official space. And he was told, F off. Anyhow, 35 minutes later, the man walks into the interview room, and the guy that was applying for a job was sitting opposite him, and it was the same guy who stole his place and gave him a little bit of a barrage. Everybody's got to be a little bit more kinder now and a little bit more positive. And no matter what situations we're going through, if we don't start to do that, all of us, and a little bit of a smile on our face, it's going to be doom and gloom when the winter comes.
Well, look, it's disappointing to hear that, because I think as we said early on, we're on podcast number 12 or 13 of the series, I think. So that means we've been doing this for probably about 13 or 14 weeks. But I guess it's disappointing when you see that, because whether you're a public servant or you're an employee of a private firm in this industry, we also desperately rely on restarting travel. Now,
Yep.
whether you're a border force officer, a customs officer, whatever function you play, airport security guard or whatever, we all rely on our employment coming from this industry, and that therefore is disappointing to hear, because I had completely the opposite approach here in Malaysia. People could not be nicer. They were so happy. These guys had been laid off, no income for 3 months, and they were so happy to be back at work. They were so obliging, kind, caring. Couldn't do enough for us. The potential is a cultural difference in the way that we used to dealing with customer service, etc. Not suggesting for a minute that the British officious immigration officer is anything but a normal, very engaging person. Maybe they're an off day. So again, we give people the benefit of the doubt, Chris, you know, in that regard. But I think this is going to become all more important. If you take it a little bit further and say, actually, in changing our behaviours, people now have got a lot of choice. A lot of airlines, a lot of tour agencies, a lot of hotels. You know, wherever you're going, it's going to be more competitive than ever before, I suspect. That gives customer choice, and therefore, when you get these sort of slurs or these bad experiences now, that will make you think again about potentially flying with that airline or flying through that airport or staying in that hotel. So I do think that we've all got to do a little bit more and be a bit kinder. And customer service should now be kind of, you know, sitting right up there. So in terms of, you know, caring for the customer and being conscientious, you know, that's much more important as far as I believe.
100%. Now, talking about positive shoots, okay, and like we're trying to focus now on a new term, so we're staying away from this new normal because nobody knows what it's going to be. But plan positives. Now, something that is positive, okay, which is the Whizz Air new flights, and everybody knows, unplanned as it is, we're quite firm supporters of Whizz Air. So that's good.
We are unplanned supporters of Whizz Air, but I think Whizz Air is a natural, you know, carrier that deserves a degree of respect because they are so disciplined. They've got fantastic unit cost. They've been quite brave and bold. They've got the messaging quite right. I think Joseph Varady and the team there have done a cracking job. So with not just new flights, I mean, this is a new AOC, you know, launched in Abu Dhabi, which I think launches this week, something around later this week. But it's great to see. But we've also, I mean, we've seen, you know, some more announcements. Ryanair, EasyJet, more flying. You know, we've seen, you know, markets that have been stalled return to. You know, we've seen hotels reopening, certainly in this part of the world. In Asia, hotels will reopening again from 1st of July. So that's been great this week. That's why I managed to get up to Langkawi, which is, I obviously thought we would jump at the chance. After my quarantine had finished, I hasten to add. But look, there are a few more of those, Chris. The other thing I would say is another green shoot that I think has not been overly kind of communicated was one of my colleagues at Skylight Aviation, Nikki Ward. She's been heavily involved in the cabin side and working with our customers around cabin controls, procedures, process, around, you know, the cabin and the cabin safety environment. And one of the things that came out from IATA last week, there was I think, you know, the bad news. Here's the bad news. The bad news was 26 customers flying from Dubai to Hong Kong on an EK flight, or it may have been Hong Kong to Dubai. I will check. We want to give a I'm sure it was Dubai, Hong Kong. 26 customers, and they tested positive for COVID on arrival. IATA and one of the top doctors, medical advisor in IATA, has, you know, through their own discussions and tracking and tracing on that flight, there have been no additional secondary cases from those 26 customers. So of course, I suspect that Emirates were able to track and trace because of P&R and customer environment and so on and so forth. And so that is really, really positive news.
Exactly.
What I haven't seen is either Emirates announced that publicly. It got dug away in an IATA medical presentation this week that Nikki was involved in. But this is really good news that you say, for example, so the 26 headline cases are out there, but actually all of the good stuff that goes with it says actually flying in this environment, provided you take the right control measures, the right kind of, steps, including masks and sanitization and so on and so forth, we can demonstrate to our customers that we can start to restore confidence by having good measures in place. And so I would think that we should be singing from the rafters, you know, about how strong positive message that is.
Exactly. And that, I mean, it's a huge one, and it just shows how safe it is once you're actually in the tube.
Yeah, indeed. so to speak.
Yeah. No, but it's good. It's good. Now, we wanted to just cover briefly about Portugal and about how ridiculous some of the decisions are, and especially the one with Portugal.
Well, we of course, there's more since we spoke about this last week, Chris. We did a Sunday session last week, but the Sunday, as of Sunday in last week's podcast, it was bizarre to you and I that the UK government had left off Portugal from its no quarantine requirement on return to the UK. We said that was quite perverse, and we thought that might change in the week. Actually, it hasn't changed in the week. It's only gotten worse. So Portugal, I think, is rightly aggrieved because they have seen themselves as being the penalised arbitrarily.
Yeah.
Where Portugal has a much lower infection rate than the UK itself.
Exactly.
And I saw in today's Telegraph, the Portuguese ambassador was pretty vociferous about this, saying, "I'm not going to let this go away. You've got countries on that list that are nonsensical to us, that we've looked for some of the logic. We said last week this was illogical. It's clear the Portuguese government think that's illogical." And the Portuguese ambassador to the Court of St. James has been very clear that that they don't think this is right and proper. But moreover, Chris, and what's more disappointing is the Foreign Office published a list that are now allowed, travel to Portugal. So it's no longer for essential travel only. You can now travel to Portugal. But the Home Office didn't have Portugal on the no quarantine list. So left hand, right hand, clearly there's something missing in the middle. But I would say that the Portuguese government, according to the ambassador in today's Telegraph, he had specifically asked the government for details of the process, because the risks had gone through, or the indications of how, the green, amber, red, and the UK government has refused to provide it. I think that is utterly bizarre.
It's more than bizarre, Steve, and good on him for keep pushing and pushing, and he should do so. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. That's bloody maddening. Now, Australia, with reducing the numbers that they're going to allow in, the logic of that does make sense. What's your opinion on that, with the 7,000 down to 4?
So remember, Australia's borders are closed for anyone other than citizens or permanent residents. Yeah. The Australian government to date has funded all of the quarantine costs for its citizens and its permanent residents returning to Australia. So 14 days staying in hotels like, the Hilton on George Street in Sydney, or the Marriott Circular Quay, I can imagine has cost the Australian taxpayer quite a fair few quid. I think there's a very strong positional argument to say that the taxpayer should not be funding quarantine costs for returning citizens or permanent residents. Yeah. I do think, however, that artificially reducing the number of arrivals. So what are they trying to do? Are they trying to stop further spread? Are they trying to stop further infection and manage, with very robust disease control measures? I suspect that's what they would say publicly. The reality is, Chris, you would struggle to get a flight for love nor money right now to Australia. Yeah. Because there's hardly any carrier operating. So Alan Joyce at Qantas has reiterated that the Qantas schedule will not return internationally until around July 2021. Yeah. Virgin Australia, as we know, is going through new ownership and likely transformation requirements thereafter, with a smaller fleet and a right-sized fleet. And so the only carrier that seems to able to get into to Australia is Qatar Airways or EK. Now, I'm not sure that sort of reducing the numbers does anything for the economics, Chris, of those carriers that are still operating. So what will likely happen now is carriers will have to, how is that 4,000 managed? Is it on slots? I mean, let's do this. That's only 15. That's only 15 aircraft. Yeah. Right. I mean, if you've got 200 to 300 punters on a flight. Yeah. I mean, so this seems perverse to me, that you would want to artificially constrain arrivals further. And, this is very hugely damaging for the Australian aviation industry. Whatever the rationale, if there is full rationale and logic around it, then I haven't heard it from Scott Morrison. The spread in the transmission in Australia seems very, very low from the numbers. I heard there was one death yesterday, as sad as that was, and there was 35 cases. Now, this is going to come to more than 20 million people. So I'm not really sure that it's right size. So we might disagree on that slightly, but I'm not sure how it's going to be policed. I don't know how they're going to do it. And I think what will happen is Australia will end up with no international services other than potentially across the Trans-Tasman.
Which, yeah, and it is such a shame. But what you said there is about the reasons why. And there are so many ifs and ands and buts, and people skirt around the subject matter. But so many of the whys don't make sense. And people now have got to start doing what's right, explain what's right, and just be very clear what's necessary.
That's right. Yeah,
otherwise
exactly.
there's much confusion and negativity again. Now, Steve, another positive, albeit it's a little bit of sad news, but Emily Howell Warner, National Aviation Hall of Fame inductee. She died at 80 on the 3rd of July. But what a woman, huh? The first one in aviation industry, including the first woman hired as a pilot by a US commercial airline and the first female commercial captain. Absolutely brilliant.
Well, look, sad news for her family and friends, of course, for the sad demise and loss of Emily. But I think, look, what this goes to say is that, I mean, you know, I guess she was a pioneer in some way, and also broke the glass ceiling. And for many females in aviation, that glass ceiling has still existed for all too long. Yeah. And as you and I have spoken before, Chris, for me, certainly when advising clients or in executive roles myself, it's never for one moment entered my head about the sex or gender of the person that one is employing. It's all about talent and competence. What I have found is actually female pilots tended to have to fight a little bit harder to get their seat on the right-hand seat or the left-hand seat. And actually, therefore, they can put a lot of these boys to shame. So I'm pleased to see that since Emily, of course, became the first female commercial skipper in the US, that we've done an awful lot more. But I think there's much more to be done. I think the gender balance is still imbalanced. But I do think a lot of airlines these days. I flew back today. I had a female skipper on my flight. I know airlines, particularly airlines in Europe and here in Malaysia, are doing an awful lot for female employees. So that's great news. So Emily's legacy will be lasting there, I suspect, Chris.
Exactly, and like you quite rightly said, sad for all the family and everything. But what a pioneer, and what a great life and a great set of memories.
Indeed.
It's fantastic. On a similar note, but obviously different people and different reasons as to why I'm bringing it up. But also, poor old Jack Charlton died yesterday. And for those who don't know who Jack Charlton is, he was one of the 1966 World Cup winners and a brother of Bobby Charlton. The reason I'm bringing it up is he said something. He said, if you can't compare me and my brother, because my brother was creative, and he always did things that made note, whereas I was a stopper and I could stop a defender. But there's a place for everybody in a team, and it takes everybody with different skills to make a winning team.
Absolutely.
I think the way he said it, and he was such a humble. I mean, he was quite. I would imagine he could be quite a nasty lad if he needed to be. But my goodness me, what a great life and career he also had.
So the one thing football is not my strong point, as you well know. But one thing I would say about football is it's a great analogy to use. The sort of the total team concept. Yeah. And the man that is off the ball is as important as the fella that's on the ball. Yeah. And in our business in aviation right now, I suspect that there are many guys that are off the ball, but boy, you bet your bottom dollar they're important to the success of that team.
No, exactly. And when it comes to analogies, there's so many stories as well, because there's so much difference in a player's remuneration subject to what they do on and off the field. And thank goodness you don't get a lot of animosity or jealousy or green eyes, at least not as openly. If a team is winning, everybody is happy to be in that team.
Indeed.
And that's the same.
We all want to be in the winning team.
Exactly. And everybody who's in a winning team, always, whether they like it or not, there's somebody who's that little bit more creative or a little wizard who makes that winning a lot more easier than if it was without them. And then they should be paid more.
Yeah.
Now, another point, AirAsia.
Yes, indeed.
Not such a positive position. However,
difficult week this week, I think, for AirAsia.
Yeah.
I've got there's an AirAsia model sitting right behind me there. I'm not sure if you can see that on the screen.
Yeah.
Look, tough week. I mean, AirAsia is a very important airline, not just here sort of locally in Malaysia, but for the region. It's not really a Malaysian business, Malaysian founders, Malaysian sort of HQ, but it is very much an ASEAN airline, Chris, and it serves all of the ASEAN countries really, really very, very well. I think there's a lot of debate. I think we could probably fill a separate 1 hour session on AirAsia, but it's fair to say that they've got set challenges that need to resolve. Down to what we spoke before, it's liquidity. I mean, there's, and of course, a business that used to be a large asset owner, with a large number of aircraft that could be mortgaged or act as guarantee against future liquidity and funding. An equity position is now one that is got a very, very, very small asset base, and therefore is struggling to kind of get cash in the markets. So we've seen already that the first quarter was very tough for AirAsia, nearly 1 billion ringgit loss. So that's pretty substantial. That's about 300 million now, from just over $350 million, which is, in that first month, that was January to March quarter. Their cash position isn't all that clever, and so it's clear today. I'm not saying anything that's out of touch. I mean, I'm not involved in AirAsia at all these days, other than as a customer. But reckon that they probably need a cash injection somewhere around 2 billion ringgit. And of course, I suspect they'll talk a delivery in the markets that they possibly can. But of course, Malaysia is also burdened by Malaysia Airlines. Malaysia Airlines is a state-owned entity, and starting to turn the corner last year, of course, and then COVID came along. Is it right for the taxpayer to support, guarantee, or invest or take an equity position in a private airline? Or is the right thing to do to shore up the capital in a state-owned airline? Difficult one for the Malaysian government, I suspect, but people much more important than me will have views on all of that.
Yeah, and on that subject matter, Steve, a lot of talk now about all of these extra promotions and stimulus being passed on to other parts of entertainment and restaurants and all sorts of industries. But as the winter is coming again, if the confidence isn't there with regards to the carriers and aviation, it's going to have a huge effect. And now they're suggesting, that maybe government should be a little bit more open-eyed and supportive. What's your thoughts on that?
I think so. I would agree entirely. I mean, I think this week we've seen in the UK, which is a good proxy as any. It's one that we know very well. Henry Smith, MP for Crawley and chair of the Future Aviation Group, has called for APD to be suspended until the end of summer schedule 2021. Yeah, I think that's a very wise move. I think the Chancellor will come out with the budget statement next week around that. I think there's many more of those moves possible. We've seen a reduction in VAT, 50% reduction in VAT, or the VAT rate's been reduced from 20% to 5%. I think that's also very helpful. I think, as we said before, I mean, the economy was in a sound position. I think what would help is actually getting borders reopened, getting people more confident, getting some real kind of getting facts to the traveling public. And I think a lot of airlines have done pretty well already, but some of these transmission rates that people are fearful and don't want to go on holidays or sort of holiday domestically rather than internationally, this is going to be a problem. If that drags, Chris, then of course the problem drags on as well. So I think sooner rather than later, I think we'll probably need to see another stimulus package. I'm not sure what that looks like, but it's clear that the European Union are useless when it comes to agreeing anything across the 26 members. I suspect that a lot of it will be done by the individual states themselves, as we expect around here in this part of the world, in Asia as well.
Exactly. Now, another good bit of news, and so many people that the way they talk, you'd think there was nothing happening and no new aircraft being delivered, but Airbus showed a slight increase with regard to the numbers of aircraft delivered. So in the second quarter, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, I think, we heard from Airbus a couple of weeks ago. They said that their focus now going forward is on deliveries. So they're no longer in sales mode; they're in delivery mode, and probably they're trying to improve their manufacturing pipeline and capabilities in terms of right sizing, transformation, cost base, etc. But I suspect that, I mean, I think there's still a lot of deliveries out there, Chris. I think, you know, a lot of the older fleet, you know, that we'll see being retired will need to be replaced. You know, when you look at the unit cost advantage you get, you know, on a 320 Classic versus a 321 Neo, it's 23%. You know, round about that number. So I think in terms of cash flow and ongoing unit cost management, that's quite smart. The problem is that you need to fund the PDPs and the like as well. So that there's a challenge. But I'm sure there's a lot of banks willing to sort of, you know, support airlines in that process. But it come down to cash game, you know.
Yeah, no, exactly. Now, last question. Okay, this came from Kim, John, and Klaus, all pilots, and what they were saying is we touched upon a point with regards to pilots being capable to transfer their skills or their understanding to others, and they're really, really hungry for it. In fact, there's quite a few pilots now getting together to create their own potential services that they could be providing. So again, I would say anybody that needs to look and see what's important now from a safety and security perspective, especially, there's no one better than to have pilots locally rather than having people, you know, traveling all over the place doing audits and overburdening handling companies with additional audits. I think it makes a lot of sense.
I agree. Well, I agree because I mentioned it last week, but no, I'm not agreeing because I've been sort of, you know, sycophant myself. But the point, I guess, look, there is a role for the point we were making last week. There's a role for qualified, licensed people to play in other parts of the business that they wouldn't ordinarily get to play with that bit of the train set. So their bit of the train set is the locomotive. What they might not normally have got to do is, you know, is play in the engine room or in the workshop, or you know, there are other parts of the training set I think that they could be exposed to that that people wouldn't necessarily have always gone to, Chris. They would have felt uncomfortable, or they wouldn't have felt sort of, you know, wanted, or you know that old sort of you know, scenario where you start sort of looking in at people. And as a young, keen, hungry guy, I felt this along the way in my career. Was, you know, I'd start to poke my nose into other areas of the business because I was interested, I was curious. But of course, your curiosity is somebody else's concern.
Yeah.
You know, so who's this little bugger here? What, you know, what they got to hide? But look, I'd be very happy to talk to those three pilots and have a conversation, take it offline, because I think there's some mileage in this, and if we can help at Skylight or help these guys in any way, then I think there's opportunities to do so, Chris.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I was expecting you to say, and that's what I'm going to arrange. So that's brilliant. Now, just as we're coming to an end, one of the things, or one of the messages I'd like to table is, so much of the big stuff is being done well. So I'm coming back to my experience again yesterday, and I would fly again, absolutely no problem. British Airways were absolutely superb. There was just one little problem, is when we landed, there was nobody there to let us through into the terminal because they were expecting the aircraft to be landing in Gatwick as per the previous schedule. So small little administrative issues and preparatory backup plans should all be tested by everybody, because you don't want now people getting one tiny little thing that really frustrates them and then to say it's not worth it, because it is. The people I managed to see and what I managed to get done was fantastic. Wouldn't have been able to do it without all those staff and the airline itself, and also the people who welcomed us back into Spain. It was incredible, and I've got to keep saying it. It was absolutely amazing how pleased they were to see people coming back in, and everywhere I went, it was a lovely experience. So the communication and information and how it's distributed is so important, and people shouldn't be letting the industry down because of small issues. With that said, all of us should be a lot more positive and smile with our eyes, even with the masks on, so people can see that we're all happy to be doing things again.
Indeed.
Because if we don't, we're going to put so many people off.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Oh, brilliant. So now, is there any any domestic tip of the week or any famous saying, or would you like to close with a few pearls of wisdom so that people know where did he come from, okay, and that he's here for a long time. But seriously, Steve, the way you're able to give feedback on almost every single subject has just made me even more determined never to go against you in a quiz or up against you in any Trivial Pursuit games, because I doubt if I do so well.
Sport's not a top issue of mine, particularly football. But if you ask me a few cricket questions, I might be able to help you. So, that's much more my. Brian Lara and Sachin Tendulkar are much more my cup of tea than Bobby or Jack Charlton, sadly.
Right. I met one on the back of an airplane, and he was a lovely fellow. We had a great chat. And the other one, I've got somebody who's got a cricket bat signed for me.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, you've got a lawn there, Chris. So next time I manage to get over, we can get the bat out.
We will, but I think we might have some soccer-related questions next week just to make me feel better.
Thanks, Chris. Have a great week.
Thank you so much. Right, take care of yourself, and really appreciate it, Steve. All the best.
See ya.